Chapter 52.
Edward!
I glanced up to see Alice standing at the back of the room, at the entrance under the stairs. She was practically humming with excitement.
Come and see me in the kitchen,
she thought, and then suddenly started singing the Star-Spangled Banner in her head. She was obviously trying to hide some secret from me. I rolled my eyes and then nodded. As I turned back, I caught Charlie watching us, taking in our obvious silent exchange. He looked away quickly. I sighed quietly. Keeping our subtle, or less than subtle in some cases, differences from Charlie had been harder than expected over the course of the long afternoon. In spite of his desire not to know more, Charlie was just not capable of turning off his policeman's brain, too long trained to notice and record the details of his surroundings. Even with Emmett's nearly constant sports commentary and numerous jokes and jabs at Bella's expense, Charlie had been quiet and thoughtful most of the day. He was unable to avoid noting the similar tone of my family's skin, including Bella. When Bella's hands moved too quickly as she talked, or her voice rose too loud, he tried to look away, but later he would notice Alice flitting across the room with similar speed. He had watched with carefully concealed interest as a rather panicked-looking Bella had passed on an increasingly squirmy Renesmee off to Rose to be fed in the kitchen. He also still harbored a suspicion that Bella might be able to turn into an animal like Jacob, despite his reassurance otherwise, and had spent much time trying to decide what kind of animal it might be, until he got frustrated with his own thoughts. "You don't want to know," he had chided himself. Nessie was asleep now, contented and back in Bella's arms. The second college football game was coming to a close, with a resounding loss for the University of Tennessee.
"Woohoo! I bet a lot of people lost their shirts betting on that one,"
said Emmett, his eyes gleaming.
"Still got your shirt on, Bella? I bet you keep it all on."
Bella stared pointedly at the TV, attempting to ignore his latest comment. Charlie glanced at Bella blankly, his mind distracted and confused.
"Don't get it."
I leaned over and kissed her cheek. She gave me a strained smile. I got up and headed towards the kitchen. Jasper caught my eye. He was leaning against the wall, looking casual but ever vigilant.
"She's doing great,"
he thought. The longer Charlie had remained in the room, the heavier his scent had become in the air. We could handle it easily, but Bella should have been going out of her mind with thirst by now, except she wasn't. I shook my head at him to indicate my ever-increasing amazement, and then headed into the kitchen. Alice was standing there with Esme, who had something clutched in her arms and was absolutely glowing. Alice was bouncing up and down on her toes and quietly clapping her hands. I smiled at them. "Well?"
We're going to set up Nessie's crib."
Alice danced around in a little circle, unable to contain her excitement.
She can sleep with you in the cottage tonight.
I paused with surprise, and then felt a deep warmth spread through my chest at the thought of bringing my daughter to our home to sleep in her own bed. Alice read my expression, and she bounced up and kissed me on the cheek.
Esme and I will go and get things all set up right now. Of course the room needs some serious redecorating, and I have to figure out where to put Nessie's clothes. There just won't be enough room in your closet, so we might have to add another closet."
She quickly sketched in her mind an additional closet that rivaled even the one off our bedroom. I raised my eyebrows and glanced at Esme. She was smiling warmly, unaware of Alice's thoughts. She was not going to like that idea. Neither would Bella.
We really thought you'd like to keep her with you,
thought Esme. Thank you, I murmured, looking at both of them. Alice touched Esme's arm.
I'll meet you in the garage,
she whispered. The wrought iron crib they had purchased a couple of days ago had been stored there. Esme had originally hoped to shop for an antique wooden crib, but within the first day it had become obvious Renesmee would need something sturdier. The crib had been one of Alice and Rose's purchases when they had gone out shopping for clothes for Nessie. Esme nodded, and Alice turned to glare at me.
Don't tell Bella yet.
I nodded, and she disappeared. I glanced down at the folded object in Esme's arms and cocked my head questioningly. She smiled.
Sheets for the crib.
Studying them, I was surprised to find they were not the familiar pink, but a soft sky blue. They were delicately decorated with pure white clouds. I reached out and traced the edges with one of my fingers.
An angel should sleep in the clouds,
Esme said quietly. Her soft eyes rose up to meet mine, and she reached out to touch my cheek. There was an uncomfortable cough from the doorway behind us. We turned, finding Jacob. Sorry, he said. I was just, you know. He gestured towards the refrigerator. Looking for food. What a surprise, I muttered. He flashed a glance at Esme.
Eat whatever you want, dear,
she said kindly. Jacob glanced down at the sheets in her arms. What are those? He asked. I held my finger up to my lip. Secret, I mouthed. For Renesmee's new crib. Oh, he said in surprise. Suppose she needs one. Guess she can't sleep in our arms forever. He looked behind me into the hall. Where did you set it up? The office? His mind briefly filled with the vision of himself sitting in Carlyle's office, patiently watching a sleeping Renesmee through the bars of a crib. I sighed, realizing a turning point was coming that Jacob did not yet see. I caught Esme's eye, and she nodded.
We'll be back shortly.
I checked on Bella through Jasper's eyes, finding her distracted, discussing Renee's newest hobby, jewelry making, with Charlie. Charlie, looking embarrassed, was telling her Renee had sent samples of her new creations to the female Cullens. I turned to Jacob. The crib will go in the cottage, Jacob, I said in a low voice. Nessie will sleep there, with Bella and me, her parents. He blinked a couple of times, and I watched as the reality of my words sunk in, his shoulders lowering slightly as some of the life drained out of his face. Damn. We had been ensconced in a surreal state since Renesmee's birth, as I had been suspended in time, waiting for Bella to wake, and we had all been faced with so much unknown. Circumstances had allowed Jacob to spend almost every moment in Nessie's presence. I could see that he had known it would end, eventually, that things would have to change. But now he felt the pain of letting go. The last few days had been a blur for him, and yet they were the most extraordinary of his life, because of Nessie, and he didn't know yet how to be away from her. Maybe it's time you went home, Jacob, I said gently. He stiffened immediately. Are you saying you want me out of here? Panic laced his thoughts, and a defensive anger brimmed to the surface. I felt a rush of familiar irritation. Why does he always have to be so defensive? I took a calming breath, not intending to get into an argument. No, Jacob, I whispered. It's just, My family, Bella, Nessie, and I, we've had a rough start. We need some time together, just us. I sighed. You can't be here all the time. There has to be balance. I paused, feeling the weight and the truth of my own words. It was time for all of us to find balance. There had been an imbalance between Bella and me since the day we met, since the first moment I saw her. Physical hurdles creating impossible inequity, inescapable emotional barriers created by discord over Bella's future, human or immortal. And Jacob had brought for a time a new imbalance into our relationship, creating a painful, unsteady asymmetry of 3 where there should have only been 2. His life had also been out of focus, too long in love with one just beyond his grasp. And now, while I knew that Jacob felt his imprint on our daughter created a sort of symmetry, the nature of this powerful connection made him prone to extremes. As Bella and I had finally found balance with each other, he needed to try as well. You haven't seen your father since you left, I said softly. And there's your pack's future to figure out, as well as Sam's. I sighed. And school, Jacob. You're young. You need to think about your education. I grimaced at my own words, suddenly feeling like my father. School? Jacob grumbled internally as he looked away. I could see he had no immediate plans to return, but there was nothing I could do about that. I considered pointing out that the others who had imprinted in the pack had went on, at least to a certain extent, with their normal lives, but perhaps it was too soon for that discussion. Finally, he glanced back at me with a resigned expression. I know you and Bella need time alone with her, he thought. I want her to have a family. A miserable edge crept into his mind as he averted his gaze again. I only ever want her to be happy. That's all I want. I closed my eyes momentarily, as the sympathy I didn't really want to feel began to seep in. Damn his sincerity. He did only want to make her happy. How could I pretend not to understand that? I took a deep breath, opening my eyes. Having you around is one of the things that make her happy, I said softly. His eyes rose to mine, brightening slightly, and gratitude flashed across his face. And I'm not telling you to leave. I'm just suggesting you remember the other things in your life. You're welcome here any time. In moderation. I stressed the last word, although I suspected his definition of moderation and mine were probably drastically different things. Jacob nodded slightly. Thanks, Edward. I appreciate that. Then he grinned. Guess you're not that bad for a bloodsucker. I laughed once. I'll take that. I reached out tentatively and grasped his shoulder briefly, before turning and heading back into the living room. The second game had officially ended, and sports commentary was beginning. Charlie was still settled into his chair.
Talk about overstaying your welcome,
Rose thought irritably.
He's as bad as those wolves.
I gave her a dark look, and her expression turned slightly chagrined.
Sorry, but I am so sick of football.
I considered letting her know she was welcome to leave. Time moved slowly through the sports show, and then the 5 o'clock news. Eventually, Esme and Alice returned, slipping quietly into the room. Emmett inquired into Bella's preference on bed style. I bet you like something sturdy. And even went as far as to ask Charlie if he had heard the sounds of 2 animals mating in the forest the night before. Finally, though, An uncomfortable silence settled over the room. Charlie was staring at Bella, going over the time since she had arrived to live with him, looking for the signs he had missed that she was getting involved in all this.
Well, I'm starving.
Seth stretched dramatically and then stood up.
It's 5:30. You gonna stand Billy and my mom up, Charlie?
Jacob had quietly instructed Seth earlier to accompany Charlie to dinner at his mother's house. Seth also hadn't been home since leaving the pack.
Come on. Bella and Nessie'll be here tomorrow. Let's get some grub.
Anxiety modded Charlie's thoughts at Seth's words, and he glanced nervously at Bella and Nessie sitting next to him.
Be here tomorrow?
Jacob had told him earlier in the forest that our family had been planning to leave, would be forced to leave because of the secrets we held. He had stayed so long today, partly because he was afraid to leave, fearful that we wouldn't be here when he returned, scared that Bella might change even more in his absence, or find herself in more danger. Finally, he took a deep breath and nodded, patting his stomach and standing up. My family rose with him.
Well,
he said, turning to Carlyle.
Thanks for the hospitality.
He slowly held out his hand, and Carlyle reached out and grasped it, shaking firmly. Charlie made quick note of his icy skin, trying to recall if he had noticed it before, during interactions with my father at the hospital. Then he nodded at Esme.
Good to see you again.
She smiled back warmly, and he met her eyes, a realization of their golden hue washing over him.
Familiar.
He looked at me, my eyes reflecting a similar color, and then slowly he took in my family around him, varying shades of the same golden amber.
Idiot. Never noticed before. How?
His gaze rested on Bella.
So different. Such a strange brown. Almost like...
Emmett suddenly slapped Charlie on the shoulder, making him stumble forward a couple of steps, and earning a glare from everyone but me. I was glad for the interruption to Charlie's thought process.
Great watching the game with you, man.
Ow, Charlie thought, giving Emmett a weak smile.
Yeah, thanks. Bye, everyone.
He turned and faced me, his slightly cool eyes appraising. They flickered to Bella and Nessie at his side, and then back to me again.
Can I trust him? Keep them safe? I hope.
Edward, he said, inclining his head.
Thanks for coming by, Charlie,
I said sincerely.
Your visit means a lot to Bella,
and myself. Charlie's gaze softened slightly, as love for his daughter and new granddaughter flushed into his mind.
Well, see you guys,
Seth said brightly. He tugged on Charlie's sleeve. Charlie glanced up at Seth.
When did this kid grow so tall?
He thought.
Yeah, I'm coming,
he mumbled, watching Seth lope quickly outside.
I'll walk you out, Dad,
said Bella. She moved with her father towards the door, Jasper and I trailing behind at a cautious distance. Charlie sighed as they reached the front porch, turning towards her.
I don't know how much we should tell Renee about this, he said.
I know,
said Bella.
I don't want to freak her out. Better to protect her. This stuff isn't for the faint-hearted.
Charlie cringed internally, wondering what else there was he didn't know.
I would have tried to protect you too, if I'd known how, he said softly. Still will.
His mouth twisted into a small smile.
But I guess you've never fit into the faint-hearted category, have you?
Bella smiled, inhaling. Jasper and I tensed with her as she burned. Charlie frowned slightly.
What to tell Renee? I'll think of something. We've got time to discuss this, right?
Right, Bella said.
But how much time? Jake says you guys were going to take off on me,
he murmured, hurt tinging his thoughts. Bella looked apologetic.
I didn't want to do that, if there was any way around it,
she said softly.
That's why we're still here.
He said you'd stay for a while, but only if I'm tough enough, and if I can keep my mouth shut.
Yes, but...
Bella looked pained.
I can't promise we'll never leave, Dad. It's pretty complicated.
Curiosity flared for a moment in Charlie's mind, and then he pushed it away.
Need to know.
Right.
You'll visit, though, if you have to go?
I promise, Dad. Now that you know just enough, I think this can work. We can keep as close as you want.
Always want you close, Bella.
I realized Charlie was leaning in for an unexpected hug, and I took an anxious step forward. Jasper circled around behind me to be in a closer position. Bella reached out an arm and wrapped it around his waist.
Keep real close, Bells, Charlie murmured. Real close.
I love you, Dad,
Bella whispered roughly. She was clenching her teeth. Then he pulled away, and she straightened, in control. I couldn't believe she had touched a human. She hadn't even fed today. When I thought of how his body must have felt under her newborn hands, soft and warm, coursing with blood just under the surface, she was just incredible. Jasper caught my eye, shrugging and backing away slowly.
She doesn't need us. If she can do that, she's got this. I don't think I could have done that right now.
I nodded, waiting another second before backing away, moving silently up to the piano. I looked around the room for a moment. The atmosphere had quickly rebounded, and it felt satisfying to see my family fall back into some of the normal patterns of existence that had too long been put on hold. Carlyle disappeared for a second, returning with a book on genetic research for himself and a sketch pad for Esme, which she hadn't picked up in days. Alice had drawn Jasper over to the stairs, where she caressed his head on her lap and tried to ease the tension of the day out of him. Rose had dragged Emmett over to build a house of cards with her, a passion carried over from her human life. Jacob, unbelievably, was in the kitchen again. Looking down, I played a few notes lightly on the piano, remembering the tune I had been thinking of for Nessie. Charlie was admiring Renesmee. Do I ever get to hold her? Bella stiffened slightly, examining Nessie, but I knew she was deeply asleep, her mind immersed in colors and starry images of loved ones. Bella carefully passed the baby to Charlie. Charlie felt a flash of surprise as Renesmee's weight moved into his arms.
She's sturdy.
Bella looked surprised.
Sturdy is good,
Charlie went on.
She'll need to be tough, surrounded by all this craziness.
He rocked her slightly, again reminded of Bella at this age.
Seems like yesterday.
Nessie's curls swayed slightly against her fair skin, just the slightest flush on her cheeks.
Like an angel. Prettiest baby I ever saw. including you, kid. Sorry, but it's true.
Bella grinned.
I know it is.
Charlie leaned closer to Renesmee.
She smells good.
Pretty baby, he murmured gently. My granddaughter. Hope they're safe.
Can I come back tomorrow?
He asked suddenly.
Keep an eye on things.
Sure, Dad. Of course. We'll be here.
You'd better be.
I tried to concentrate on my song, giving them privacy for final goodbyes. I was thinking of something light and playful. I ran through a couple of arpeggios, trying to decide on a key. I heard Charlie's steps on the front stairs, and I glanced over to see Bella standing in the doorway, watching him go. She stood there long after he had driven out of the drive and onto the freeway. I gave her a few moments with her thoughts, continuing to play quietly.
Wow,
Bella finally whispered, breaking her reverie. I got up and moved swiftly across the room, wrapping my arms around her waist. You took the words right out of my mouth, I said in her ear.
Edward, I did it.
Relief painted her voice. You did, I said, kissing her neck. You were unbelievable. All that worrying over being a newborn, and then you skip it altogether. And she always accused me of being good at everything.
I'm not even sure she's really a vampire, let alone a newborn, Emmett called out. She's too tame.
Bella's head whipped in the direction of his voice, and she growled, eyes flashing in an angry red. It seemed she had reached the end of her rope with Emmett. Actually, she had probably reached it a long time ago, but couldn't do anything with Charlie here.
Ooh, scary, Emmett mocked. I'm shaking here.
Bella hissed loudly, waking Nessie, who squirmed and then inhaled, searching for Charlie's scent. Her instinct to use scent before sight, much like my kind did, surprised me. She touched Bella's cheek, showing his face.
Charlie will be back tomorrow,
said Bella, calming slightly.
Excellent,
Emmett grinned, rubbing his hands together. Rose laughed, and Bella growled angrily. Behind her, Jasper raised his eyebrows.
Do I have to stop her if she attacks him? I hope not.
Emmett was such an idiot. Rather than try to keep Bella calm, he was intentionally antagonizing her, had been all day. Despite his bravado, Emmett actually had no direct experience trying to handle a newborn, except for the ones he had torn to pieces last spring. But Bella was no brainless, blood-crazed creature, and clearly Emmett was having difficulty recalling his own newborn days, when we had all had to walk on eggshells for a year to keep him from blowing up and destroying the house. I recalled suddenly a conversation I had had with Bella a few months back, regarding how strong she would be as a newborn.
As strong as Emmett?
Bella had asked. Yes, I had said, wondering how Emmett would handle not being the strongest one of us for once. Do me a favor and challenge him to an arm wrestling match. It would be a good experience for him.
Yes,
thought Alice. This was going to be sweet.